Please kindly take your seats. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please enter the room and take your seats. And don't forget to tweet on our regional dialogue on access to elections with hashtags RD3 and disability and election. Once again, don't forget to tweet on today's agenda and programs. Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you have had an enjoyable lunch. We will now proceed with the plenary session 6, engaging youth with disability to promote inclusion in political participation and election process, challenges and strategies. We invite our speakers to come up on stage. Mr. Ramini Macharashvili, founder, Change for Equal Rights, Georgia. Ms. Malvika Iyer, Ph.D., Disability Inclusion, India. And Mr. Irwanto, Chairman of Center for Disability Studies, University of Indonesia. Chairing the session, Ms. Virginia Atkinson, Access and Inclusion Specialist, International Foundation for Electoral System. Virginia Atkinson is the Access and Inclusion Specialist at IFES, where she works with organizations around the world to increase access to the electoral process for persons with disabilities. She's the lead author of the manual, Equal Access, How to Include Persons with Disabilities in Elections and Political Processes. Virginia is actively involved in numerous regional and international disability advocacy groups, including as an advisor to the General Election Network for Disability Access in ASEAN, and the Interaction Disability Working Group, which is working to mainstream the inclusion of persons with disabilities throughout international development organizations. She's also chairs IFES Election Access Working Group. Virginia was a member of the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts, tasked with increasing access to the political process for persons with disabilities in Europe, and helped draft the committee's recommendation to member states on inclusion. She has conducted access monitoring during elections in Latin America and Asia. Prior to joining IFES, she worked for Survivor Corps, an organization which advocated for the rights of conflict survivors. Virginia holds a master's degree in international relations from the University of Reading, England. I hand the floor to Ms. Virginia Atkinson. Virginia.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I think we need some Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. I know after lunch it's tough. We're going to have a really exciting discussion today about engaging youth with disabilities in elections and the political process more broadly. So in most countries around the world, as I'm sure you know, youth are a lot less likely than their older counterparts to vote. In many countries as well, people with disabilities are a lot less likely to vote. So when you combine these two demographics of youth and disability, the participation on election day of youth with disabilities is usually very low. So our panelists today are going to talk about some strategies to increase political participation on election day, but also much more broadly, and talk a little bit about how youth can encourage political participation in a much broader context and lead and influence progressive policy changes much more broadly. So I think we can all agree on why participating in political life is important for youth with disabilities, but the how is really the defining point that we're still waiting to have some more information on. So some strategies that have been successful in other contexts where IFES works are including youth with disabilities in youth organizations, for example. So the combined forces of youth DPOs and youth organizations are really quite impactful. Something else that's been really impactful is if you're an election management body, hiring youth with disabilities to be interns in your office. And this helps encourage and generate interest in public service much more broadly, and then also helps train a cadre of young youth that can one day go on to hold elected office in your election management body. In terms of empowering young leaders, there's also often a gap for youth with disabilities in terms of leadership positions in DPOs. Many DPOs are led by sort of the old guard, and youth don't have much opportunity for participation in leadership roles. So another way to kind of mitigate that is doing leadership trainings for youth with disabilities to empower them and give them the skills and confidence in order to one day become leaders of these organizations. There's also the more formal educational approach. So for example, civics courses in universities through a formal education. And many civics courses include components on disability rights and how disability rights are related to political rights. And we're joined here today by one of our panelists, Ramini from Georgia, who's going to talk a little bit more about his experiences in a formal university educational setting on civics. So I'm not going to talk for too much time. I'm going to try and leave it to our panel. We have quite an exciting lineup today. Each speaker is going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a lot of time for questions and answers afterwards and an interactive dialogue with you all. So Ramini, to my right, Ramini Macharashvili is from Georgia. He is a third-year law student right now, but during his first year of law school, he founded a youth organization called Changes for Equal Rights. And this organization has been very successful in terms of advocating with government to make policy changes. So for example, improving the transportation situation and having more accessible buses, which I'm sure he'll talk a little bit more about today. We're also joined by Malvika Iyer, who's from India. She's going to talk a little bit about the Indian experience in this regard. She is completing her Ph.D. currently and is a junior research fellow at the Madras School of Social Work in India. She's spoken at numerous events, including at TEDx in Chennai, and she's also worked with children with disabilities at the Center for Child and Adolescent Wellbeing in Delhi. So welcome. Then we also have here on the end of the panel, Professor Irwanto. He's the founder and director of the Center for Disability Studies and the co-director for the Center on Child Protection at the University of Indonesia. I know many of you are already familiar with him. He's also served as an expert member of a panel on setting a national agenda for DPOs after the ratification of the CRPD, and has served as a resource person on the rights of young people with disabilities for the UN Population Fund. So as you see, we have a really exciting panel, people from all around the world here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Ramini first, who's going to talk a little bit about barriers that youth with disabilities encounter in Georgia, and also how youth-led DPOs have played such a strong role in advocating for the ratification of the CRPD, which Georgia just did in 2013. So, Ramini?
Hello, everybody. And thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very important conference. First of all, I'd like to say a couple of words about Georgia. Georgia is a small country and its population is around 4.5 million people. And the territory is around 70,000 square kilometers. And it's located on the crossroads of Europe and Asia. As to my organization,
ჩემი ორგანიზაცია არის ახალგაზრდული ორგანიზაცია, რომლის წევრთა ნახევარზე მეტი არის შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობის მქონე პირი.
my organization is the organization of disabled persons. It's a young organization, and half of the people in the organization are disabled.
და ჩემი ორგანიზაციის მიზნებია შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობის მქონე პირთა უფლებების დაცვა და მათი გააქტიურება და საზოგადოებრივ ცხოვრებაში ჩაერთვა.
The goal of my organization is to protect the rights of the people with disabilities and to engage these people into society and normal life.
საქმიანობის სფეროს ძირითადად წარმოადგენს შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობის მქონე პირთა უფლებების ადვოკატირება და შუშუმობითა საკითხებზე საზოგადოების ცნობიერების დონის ამაღლება.
Well, the main goal of the organization, the objective again, lies into engaging these people in normal life and protecting their rights, and also increasing the awareness of the society in general about the people with disabilities and their awareness about life, their civic rights.
ჩვენს ქვეყანაში რამდენიმე მნიშვნელოვანი პრობლემა არსებობს შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობის მქონე პირებთან დაკავშირებით.
In our country, there are several problems associated with protecting the rights of the persons with disabilities.
პირველ რიგში მინდა საკანონმდებლო ხარვეზები.
First of all, I would like to underline the legislative flaws that exist.
რაც გამოიხატება იმაში, რომ სტატუსის მინიჭება ხდება სამედიცინო მიდგომით.
Well, this problem basically is expressed in a way that the status to these people is being assigned in terms of medical perspectives.
და თუ პირი ვერ აკმაყოფილებს თქვათ იმ მოთხოვნას, რაც კანონში წერია კონკრეტულ დიაგნოზს, იგი რჩება სტატუსის გარეშე.
And if the person does not meet the requirements that is stated in the legislation, the medical requirements, that the person is left out and is not given the status of a person with disability.
აგრეთვე ანუ შუშუმ პირები ხშირად დგანან მშობლის უფლების დაკარგვის საფრთხის წინაშე.
So very often the persons with disabilities have no right to work. They're not engaged in the workforce.
რადგან კანონი ითვალისწინებს ისეთ შემთხვევას, თუ მშობელი 24 საათის განმავლობაში უმოთვალყურეოდ დაწოვებს შვილს, ეს არის საფუძველი იმისა, რომ მას მშობლის უფლება ჩამოართვა.
Because the law again states that if the person, if the parent leaves the persons with disabilities without the guidance during 24 hours, then, this parent may lose even the right of being a parent.
ხოლო შეზღუდული შესაძლებლობის მქონე პირებს, რომელთაც არ აქვს შესაძლებლობა შვილებს მოუარონ, იძულებული არიან ისინი თავშესაფარში მიიყვანონ და
And those parents who cannot take care of their children, the parents who have the disabilities, they have to leave their children in the foster care. The second problem, which is also important, is that there is not enough data about the persons with disabilities, and the statistics are sometimes inadequate. And there are also there are not enough and inadequate healthcare packages for the people with disabilities. The packages do not consider the individual approach toward the persons with disabilities. And the environment is inaccessible. There is lack of education, lack of information. And accordingly, they're not engaged in the workforce. They have difficulties with finding the jobs. And the main reason for this is that the persons with disabilities are extremely passive, in engaging the current developments in the sphere. They're not engaged. And the most important activity that the person, of course, can do is participate in elections. And the engagement of the persons with disabilities in elections is very low in our country. Basically, they only use their passive rights to vote. And they do not participate in the meetings and rallies where they can take part in discussions about elections. And accordingly, they do not use the active right to vote. In general, the number of voters in Georgia is around 3 million people. And the person with disabilities officially registered, the number of the person with disabilities is 127,000. However, the registered voters from the person with disabilities equals to 11,234. And in the last elections in 2014, only around 5,000 persons with disabilities participated. Based on the research done by the non-governmental organization, the main reason for passivity, for being passive for the persons with disabilities in Georgia is the is the environment which is not adapted. They consider this as the major problem and reason for being passive. Inaccessible roads to get to the polling stations, and the lack of trust. As to the decision-making bodies electing the persons with disabilities, we have only 2 cases like that in Georgia. One is in the capital's representative body of the local municipality, and the second one is in the local council of the region. Several steps have been taken in order to improve the electoral processes. First of all, 467 electoral districts became adapted out of 3,637. Special bulletins have been created for people with low vision. And special informative meetings took place during the pre-election period. And the hotline was created in the Central Election Commission, which would serve the persons with disabilities in case of their willingness. If they wanted to get to the district, then they would actually provide the transportation for them. In this auction, in this campaign, our organization also participated. And several dozens of persons with disabilities have been transported to the electoral district in order to vote. Also, we managed to install the interpreter, sign language interpreter on public broadcasting. There was also the talk about the initiative on providing certain quotas in the parliament for the persons with disabilities. But we refused because we didn't want to have, the person with disability be in parliament just because he or she is disabled. My organization is holding meetings with politicians, with governmental organizations and youth organizations. And as a result, in the region, we see more activities from the side of the youth. And we created the Club of Volunteers, where more than 200 young people join. And we carry out certain campaigns together. Advocacy initiatives in order to protect the rights of the persons with disabilities. In order to increase the awareness of the society, we carry out trainings in schools, also in universities, and together with the governmental bodies, we carry out trainings on how to assist the persons with disabilities. And lastly, I would like to mention, in order to encourage the activities of the youth in that sphere, it's important to use the internet and different social websites. And with the help of these elements, we managed actually to engage several persons with disabilities in our activities. It's important to put more accent and focus on youth, because they are the guarantees for change of stereotypes that exist in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ramini. It's interesting to hear about some of the challenges that you're having in Georgia, such as low turnout, low voter turnout, but also some of the successes, and in particular the recommendation that you made about increasing the use of social media in order to reach youth with disabilities. Our next speaker, Malvika, is actually going to talk a little bit about youth with disabilities who ran an accessible social media campaign about elections. So this actually ties in very nicely to our next speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would first like to thank Agenda for inviting me here. I'm coming all the way from India. I'm a bomb blast survivor, and I'm working passionately on disability and inclusion. I think this is the perfect place to share my views from India. To begin with, there are nearly 26 million Indians who have a disability, and their lives are largely dependent on government services, and the youth consist of a major part of it. As you can see, the Indian scenario, this is according to the census data of 2011, but the real picture is much high. It is accounted that there are nearly 70 million people with disability in India, and most of them do not have accessibility to the information on top government websites such as the Election Commission of India. It is not accessible at all. So far, the citizens, the youth, have to depend on others to cast their vote. Persons with visual disabilities could not even keep their choice a secret, that they had to take help from others while casting their vote. Physically disabled youth have to be carried into the booth. And there was this one woman I spoke to who was very shy, and she was very uncomfortable, although there were no ramps or of any kind of accessible measures near the polling booth. And she said that even though they are courteous, even though the nodal officers at the polling booth are courteous, but it's very difficult to be carried on. You know, it's not very comfortable. And many such officers do not even have the information that people with mental or psychosocial disability are eligible to vote. They just consider that, you know, if you are not in a state where you cannot have a conscious, where you're not aware or you cannot make a decision on your own, then you are not eligible to vote. So that is the scenario, that is the status in India right now. And I have next a case study of a person, a doctor, who is a polio survivor from New Delhi, India, who worked with a number of disabled youth in India, and how he was very successful in having an accessible election with various strategies involving social media as well. His name is Dr. Satyendra Singh. When he found out that how every individual, youth with disabilities, who have such an important part in playing, in shaping the world, and they were not able to vote, so he decided that he had to take resort to social media and newspapers and all sorts of media communication channels to reach to the Election Commission of India and the Chief Commissioner of Persons with Disabilities in India. So the judiciary had been responsible in the past in making the electoral process easier for persons with disabilities. The difficulty of dignified access to the electoral process ultimately led to the Supreme Court taking cognizance of a letter written by the Disability Rights Group and converting the same into a PIL, public interest litigation. So together, they contacted the highest nodal officers, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and then they wrote that there has to be a measure that can impart every individual with disability, and they may be able to participate in such elections. They volunteered. There was also a directive issued by the Election Commission of India on this order, mandating the training of officials, sensitizing them to the concerns of persons with disabilities, and publicizing accessibility, which was imperative at that time. So Dr. Singh, along with the youth, they got together, came up with movies and pictorial representations and all sorts of very interactive and creative social media campaign, and they went door to door, they went to each medium as possible, and they got together several youth with disability, and then they sensitized them. They sensitized the officers first who were at the polling booth and talked about their needs, their requirements. And then they came up with the first biggest concern. There was no data of voters on disability. There is no data as such. So that's the first thing he insisted, that he proposed to the CEO of Delhi to set up a registration link where voters with disability can register before polls and enter their type of disability and ask for the particular assistance that is needed on the polling day. Also, a website may be set up for any other kind of grievances which will directly be handled on the polling day. And thus, the election day came. On the polling day, voters with disability, the youth with disability who had taken who were completely actively participated in the whole campaign, the facilities that they asked for was provided. There was reserved parking, there were ramps, there was braille, there was electronic voting machine. Every such kind that was needed for an accessible election was there. So this was an example of Delhi, but how and when is it going to come to every state in India? This is perhaps just one state with one example, but when are we ever going to be able to achieve this kind of accessible election in every part of our country? So together, we have some challenges and strategies that we can look upon and especially involve the youth, the youth, the disabled youth who can very well participate and make way for an accessible elections. And I have some strategies here. Before that, I would like to share a few lines that I spoke to youth with disability and what they had to share with me. This one person told me, she's a woman who is aged 25. I care about social programs, laws and policies that affect my family and the people I work with. This was her view on election, but she was never able to vote because no accessible polling. There's another person, I want to exercise my democratic right. Another person, I need to set an example for others to get out and vote because it is important. These are their strong views, but when are they going to be able to vote? What are the challenges? The website is not accessible, there's lack of information, not enough emotional support. Some of them feel nervous and shy to come out and talk about their issues. They're unable to understand the process. Personal circumstances. There are varied challenges which youth have personally felt, and here are some strategies that together we have come across to put to the Minister and to the Election Commission of India. Social media campaigns. Social networking sites give social movements a quick, no-cost method to organize, disseminate information, and mobilize people. Increase use of electronic channels such as Facebook, blogs, and emails. There's need to an encouragement and to provide opportunities for key influencers such as politicians and other people so that they can have face-to-face contact with the media. And I think when youth are able to have a face-to-face contact with these politicians, it effectively helps them. They can find out the person they want to be in charge of, and then thus there is an increase in the interest to vote. Also, it has been found out that if the polling booth, or if say the information wherever they want to spread, if they are in the areas where there is say a youth program, youth outreach program, or remedial adult education program, if these kind of information booths are set up in the place where those people, the youth with disabled are, that's where they are. So if that will be the best approach to directly target them. And there is social media, which can definitely disarm any kind of stigma through education. Social media allows for quick, easy dissemination of public health and safety information from reputable sources. And there are people who are isolated and shy, and they have said that they feel very comfortable when they get information from internet, because that's the way they are able to be confident and share their views more confidently. Internet is the main source of information about government and policies. And there are so many facilities such as how to avail an ID card and information such as who is the candidate and everything of that sort. So these polling stations, any kind of information, if provided via internet, the youth have agreedly said that we will be more active, we would want to participate in such political rallies, and we would want to be more active thus. And hence, we have the plan ahead. To ensure that youth with disabilities are able to participate in the elections, help political parties to include youth with disabilities during election planning and preparations, involvement of special educators to create videos for educating the polling staff by youth with disabilities for a radical approach towards inclusive elections, prepare a database of youth voters with disabilities, establish a helpline number for easy access to information, separate queues, accessible toilets, wheelchairs and parking facilities, access audit of polling booths by youth with disabilities, pictorial signage for those with hearing problems, provision for transportation for wheelchair users and other dependent individuals with disabilities on the polling day. So to conclude my talk, I would like to say that it may be optimistic to say that had youth with disabilities been considered to be the vote bank, there would be a lot more willingness to cater to their interest and even encourage political parties to get persons with disabilities to stand for elections. That may be a best case scenario, but at the very least, it is unthinkable that we live in a democracy where some citizens are less equal than others and in law, no less. The right to effective political participation for persons with disabilities require legal reform in many aspects, but also needs a radical shift in our thinking about them as equal citizens deserving dignity, recognition of their ability and right to make their own decisions, and in some cases, even decisions on behalf of other citizens they wish to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Malvika. It's exciting to hear about progress that's been made in one region of India, and also to hear that you have some good ideas for concrete strategies for expanding that across the rest of the country. And I'm sure that many of the participants in this room saw some ideas that could also be applied in your context as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor Irwanto, who's going to talk a little bit about the context in Indonesia and discussing the turnout among voters under 30 for the 2014 election, and also some similar themes that some of our other panelists have discussed in terms of how to increase voter turnout among youth with disabilities. Professor?
Thank you. Please put on your gadget. I will speak in Bahasa because I've written my presentation in English. I hope all of you have access to the gadget. Otherwise, you are as disabled as us. Good afternoon everyone, selamat sore teman-teman sekalian. Saya diminta untuk menggambarkan partisipasi anak muda dan anak muda dengan disabilitas dalam pemilu 2014 yang lalu di Indonesia. Lanjut. Kalau kita melihat populasi Indonesia saat ini ada sekitar 252 juta populasinya. I will wait. Do you want to put this up? Secara total sebetulnya young voters itu didefinisikan mereka yang berusia 17 tahun, eligibility age is 17 di Indonesia, 17 sampai 30 tahun itu yang kami anggap sebagai young voters. Usia 17 sampai 22 adalah first time voters. Jumlah penduduk yang memenuhi usia 17 sampai dengan 30 tahun kurang lebih 30%. Lanjut. Ya, kurang lebih di situ. 30%. Karena data mengenai partisipasi anak muda tidak terlalu banyak diterbitkan, ada di sana sini Kompas memuat ya, tetapi yang sangat disayangkan seringkali data itu dimuat tanpa memberitahu apakah ini pada pemilu presiden, apakah ini pada pemilu parlemen, tidak jelas, ya. Sehingga saya sendiri dalam mengambil kesimpulan terpaksa mengatakan ya kurang lebih seperti ini apakah di presiden maupun di parlemen. Tetapi data dari Iyer Dia menerbitkan di websitenya, pemilu presiden mempunyai turnout sedikit lebih tinggi kalau tidak salah dibanding pemilu parlemen. Lanjut. Ya, ini ada. Nanti kalau tertarik minta saja fotokopinya. Lanjut. Saya menghitung sendiri, young voters di Indonesia itu partisipasinya fluktuatif, kadang-kadang meningkat, kadang-kadang turun, ya. Dan tahun ini memang turun sebetulnya. Lanjut. Nah, kalau kita lihat yang meningkat pesat atau yang paling tinggi partisipasinya adalah anak muda berusia 23 sampai 30 tahun. Kalau dilihat dari populasinya, inilah yang partisipasinya paling tinggi. Sedangkan first time voters 17 to 20 years old itu hanya 56%, tetapi 23 sampai 30 tahun itu 89%, lebih tinggi dari total participation yang hanya sekitar, nanti akan kita lihat total participation hanya sekitar 84%. Lanjut. Sorry, kembali lagi ke yang tadi. Tetapi disayangkan kalau kita lihat yang di bawah, secara menyeluruh yang voters dari 17 sampai ke 30 tahun partisipasinya sebetulnya rendah, yaitu hanya sekitar 35% kalau dihitung dari populasi terdaftar yang usianya eligible untuk political votes. Jadi VIP, ya. Itu adalah orang-orang terdaftar yang usianya boleh memilih. Lanjut. Ini adalah kesimpulannya. Pemilu di Indonesia terasa sebagai pemilu anak muda pada waktu yang lalu karena adanya atensi dari media sosial, media cyber, berbasis cyber, dan media elektronik. Sumber berita mereka, terutama yang baik-baik, adalah anak muda. Karena mereka lebih inspiratif, lebih kreatif, suaranya lebih lain daripada yang lain, sedangkan sumber berita buruknya selalu yang tua-tua. Ya, yang maunya bertengkar terus, menjelek-jelekan orang lain, itu yang tua-tua begitu. Yang muda lebih banyak yang positif, argumen dengan data, argumen mengenai kekuatan visi misi kandidat dan sebagainya. Kalau ada kesan bahwa pemilu di Indonesia adalah pemilunya anak muda, tadi saya kira itu adalah halo effect dari media bias. Karena lagi-lagi ternyata anak muda di Indonesia secara menyeluruh partisipasinya masih rendah. Lanjut. Nah, bagaimana dengan partisipasi anak muda yang mengalami disability? Pertama, saya dihadapkan pada no information. Tidak ada cara saya menggali data dimanapun untuk mencari tahu partisipasi anak muda yang mengalami disabilitas. Pertama, tidak dipublish, kalaupun ada mungkin. Kedua, mekanisme untuk track down atau tracer untuk men-trace kembali partisipasi anak muda. Entah sudah dilakukan atau belum, tapi tidak aksesibel untuk saya juga tidak punya akses untuk itu. Dan kemudian kalau tracer tadi digunakan untuk monitoring, itu pun hasilnya tidak ada di publik. Jadi artinya mungkin ada di lemarinya siapa, saya tidak tahu, tetapi secara publik sulit sekali untuk mencari data ini. Lanjut. Kita mencoba mereka-reka. Pertama, kalau dari observasi dari Asia Foundation, dijelaskan partisipasi orang dengan disabilitas pada umumnya di dalam pemilu-pemilu yang lalu dan pemilu saat ini lebih rendah dari populasi umum. Jadi, as a rule of thumb, participation of person with disability itu diperkirakan lebih rendah dari partisipasi populasi umum. Ya. Kedua, tetapi kalau kita bertanya kepada anak-anak atau orang dengan, ya 02 saya sudah tahu Mas, kalau kita bertanya kepada konstituen orang dengan disabilitas merasa pemilu memang penting dan mereka ingin menyalurkan aspirasi mereka. Jadi ini bukan karena itu tidak penting, mereka penting, tetapi pasti ada masalah lain, gitu. Selain itu KPU pernah menjanjikan bahkan mempunyai protokol yang sudah progresif untuk memfasilitasi pemilih dengan disabilitas. Tetapi janji itu, mari kita lihat, lanjut. Nah, dari observasi agenda sendiri baru dipenuhi sekitar 60%. Lebih dari 30% dari fasilitas yang ada masih tidak disabled friendly. Ini mungkin merupakan salah satu persoalan. Lanjut. Persoalan lain, walaupun mereka ingin ikut memilih, banyak yang pesimis. Ngapain gua capek-capek memilih, padahal partisipasi saya mungkin tidak terwakili dari orang-orang yang saya pilih. Karena legislatif yang lalu, pelamar atau calon-calon yang mempunyai disabilitas kalah semuanya. Hampir di semua front itu tidak kebanyakan tidak terpilih. Lanjut. Nah, kalau kita ingin mencari tahu sebab yang lain, pertama yang harus kita ketahui adalah where are they? Di mana orang-orang yang anak muda terutama yang mengalami disabilitas itu berada? Were they at home? Were they in schools? Atau were they in their jobs? But informal, formal ya, kita harus tahu. Dan informasi seperti ini lagi-lagi tidak tersedia. Oleh karena itu, kalau mereka pun ada di sekolah, sekolah tidak digunakan sebagai bagian penting dari voter education. Indonesia, voter education itu tidak dilakukan di sekolah. Sekolah takut dengan masuknya politik. Kedua, kalau mereka di rumah, kebanyakan mungkin mereka tidak register atau tidak didaftarkan. Bahkan di banyak tempat mereka bukan bagian dari kartu keluarga. They are excluded from the family card, ya, sehingga tidak mungkin didata. Bagaimana kalau in workplaces? Statistics, available statistik menyatakan orang dengan disabilitas kebanyakan bekerja sendiri. Yang employed sedikit, tapi self-employment a lot, and working in the informal sector. Lagi-lagi karena mereka bekerja sendiri dan mereka working in the informal sector, ada kemungkinan mereka missed di dalam pendaftaran dan di dalam voting drive. Ya. Lanjut. Berikut ini kelihatan sekali. Kalau kita lihat siapa yang ikut, who are actually participating atau participated in the political, the electoral vote, it's only mostly majority people with physical disabilities. Other people with other disabilities are underrepresented. Mengapa ini? Karena kemungkinan besar hambatan dari teman-teman ini mungkin lebih sedikit atau mereka mempunyai perwakilan yang lebih kuat dibandingkan kategori disabilitas yang lain. Dan saya kira ini perlu diperhitungkan. Ya. Lanjut. Faktor lain adalah misalnya kalau Anda mengalami impairment, mengalami disabilitas karena penyakit yang terstigma seperti lepra, kemungkinan besar 90% Anda tidak akan didaftar. Kemudian, age not yet, access to cyber technology, ini menjadi masalah besar, terutama kalau ini adalah young people election, kebanyakan voting drive-nya melalui cyber technology, tetapi young people with disabilities have lack of access to this technology. Kemudian tentunya tidak ada conscious and planned strategy to drive young people with disability to the voting polls. Saya kira observasi ini penting karena penentu kebijakan di dalam pemilu kemarin, walaupun orang dengan disabilitas diikut sertakan, tetapi pengambil keputusannya kelihatannya masih bukan. Dan yang lain-lain adalah perasaan tidak nyaman ketika di voting booths karena merasa selalu diintip, tidak mempunyai privacy, jadi tontonan, jadi barang aneh dan sebagainya, yang menyebabkan mungkin sebagian besar enggan datang ke voting. Apalagi kalau dia tinggal di daerah-daerah yang jauh dari tempat pemilihan, hampir tidak mungkin orang yang mengalami disabilitas untuk ikut. Next. Ya, ini homework kita. Pertama menurut saya, enak tidak enak, mau tidak mau, sulit ataupun tidak, registration should include data on disability. Tidak bisa tidak. And aggregated by age, by sex. Tidak perlu by categories of disability, tapi paling tidak adalah indication adanya special need. Kedua, sekolah kalau di Indonesia perlu dilibatkan sebagai tempat pendidikan political rights, dan itu dari sejak SD. Kemudian DPO yang saat ini sibuk, saya lihat DPO yang kemarin itu sibuk sekali mendrive teman-temannya sendiri, kebanyakan orang dewasa, ya. Sedangkan yang young people tidak mendapat atensi khusus. Kemudian accessibility tentu first and for all, kalau accessibility-nya buruk, tentu partisipasinya buruk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Awanto. I think your idea about including more civic education, more voter education in schools is a really great one, and one that could be hopefully used here and replicated elsewhere as well. So I think all of our panelists identified several key themes: the lack of data in general, the low voter turnout among youth with disabilities, and also the need to increase use of social media in order to target youth with disabilities, so social media in accessible formats. So I'm going to open it up to the floor for any questions for any of our panelists. If you could please just say your name, and then if your question is for a specific panelist, just let us know. So any questions? I can give you a moment to think, and I'll ask the panelists a question. Ramini, could you maybe talk a little bit about why it's important for youth specifically to form coalitions and conduct advocacy around the political process?
კვალიციის ჩამოყალიბება იმიტომაა მნიშვნელოვანი, რომ ანუ ხდება ურთიერთთანამშრომლობა, ურთიერთგამოცდილების გაზიარება.
It's important to establish the coalition because that way we can share our experiences, share the stories with each other.
და ერთად უფრო ეფექტურად აკეთებენ იმ საერთო საქმეს, რომელსაც თავზე შეიძლება
And together, we're doing the work a lot more effectively, the kind of work that probably individually we wouldn't be able to do. And the advocacy campaign is important because the society is becoming more aware of about the persons and the importance of protecting the rights of the persons with disabilities. and the person with disabilities themselves learn more. Yes, that's mainly.
Thank you. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for the panelists? Yes, right back here.
Saya akan pakai bahasa Indonesia. Sebenarnya bukan pertanyaan tetapi juga hanya tanggapan. Kita semua menyadari bahwa dalam pemilu presiden kemarin partisipasinya cukup besar. Dan itu juga salah satunya karena pengaruh televisi. Di mana ketika debat presiden banyak orang yang bisa tahu. Tetapi tetap ada kekurangannya ketika pada debat pertama, kalau saya tidak salah, masih belum ada bahasa isyarat digunakan. Dan baru dipakai pada debat kedua. Tapi kalau saya juga tidak salah, itu pun masih belum sempurna. Mohon saya dikoreksi dari teman-teman difabel, betul? Karena masih terlalu kecil untuk sign language-nya. Betul? Oke. Nah, saya pikir itu juga masukan bagi pihak televisi, di mana ketika memberikan informasi, juga harus bisa aksesibel bagi semua dan juga melibatkan teman-teman difabel sehingga informasi bisa diterima oleh semua. Dan ini juga mungkin jadi tambahan masukan bagi Pak Iyer. Saya rasa dengan informasi yang cukup mungkin bisa meningkatkan partisipasi dari teman-teman anak-anak muda. Karena saya tahu anak-anak muda lebih banyak terpapar dari informasi melalui berbagai macam media sosial, pergaulan mereka, dan banyak macam lainnya. Demikian. Terima kasih.
Sorry, ini kalau anak muda dengan disabilitas gimana?
Kak, setahu saya, kalau saya tidak salah, dan saya mohon dikoreksi, banyak mereka yang sangat terkoneksi dengan internet. Tetapi benar tadi kata Pak Iyer, ketika masuk kepada proses votingnya, mungkin itu yang perlu kita perbaiki lebih banyak lagi. Demikian, terima kasih.
Thank you. Yes, right here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Rina Prasarani. I'm from the Indonesian Disabled People Association, also the Indonesian Blind Union. Perhaps I would like to again highlight it on the main issues for the youngsters, the disabled youngsters, in the context of casting their vote. I've been involved in a lot of political education, and it seems like the issue of political issues for the youngsters, whether or not they're disabled or not, it's to attract their attention to the political issue. Sometimes it's one big challenge for us. And as there are lack of information which is accessible to the persons or the youngsters with disabilities, the challenge become bigger. For example, if you are having the hearing impairment, even for a small, simple words in political context that we used to hear, it's not understandable for them. So sometimes we need more time for them to understand, for example, what is accommodation means. It happens. And it's not only happen in the village area, but also in the big city like in Jakarta. And as one of the participants also mentioned that a lot of teenagers, blind teenagers already accessible with the technology, but it only happens in the big cities. There are a lot of blind youngsters who doesn't even know how to read and write Braille, doesn't have access to information. And this is also what the biggest challenge, and to attract them in this field, to raise their awareness on the importance of having their vote casted is also very important. And also a lot of, here in Indonesia, I don't know in other countries, but here also in Indonesia, there are a lot of political party, which is also makes another challenge for us. And most of them provide their organizational tools not in an accessible format. So all the youngsters with disabilities who usually doesn't know what is political is about, who doesn't know really know the political organization is about, doesn't have enough information on who to be or which organization or political party should be chosen. It is also the big challenge for us. Thank you.
Yes, I see one more question here. Oh, I think we have two here.
Baik, saya juga. Saya mau menambahkan informasi dari Pak Irwanto untuk pemilih pemula di pemilu 2014 itu sebenarnya ada satu segmen untuk meningkatkan partisipasi di pemilih pemula, ada segmen pemilih pemula, dan itu kami betul-betul bergerak di teman-teman pemilih pemula. Pendidikan pemilih yang dilakukan KPU memang kami masuk ke sekolah-sekolah dan memang kami harus akui ini sebatas pada masa pemilu saja. Pasca pemilu ini sedang kami rancang bagaimana pendidikan pemilih itu bisa masuk ke sekolah-sekolah. Kemudian juga di informasi lengkap terkait dengan pemilih pemula memang lebih lengkap di Pilpres. Kami menghitung betul jumlah pemilih pemula dan tingkat partisipasi di pemilih pemula. Di kota Yogyakarta dengan jumlah pemilih pemula 10%, 10-12% dari DPT dengan tingkat partisipasi 80%. Itu di kota Yogyakarta. Itu untuk Pilpres saja memang. Nah, terkait dengan informasi pemilih pemula di teman-teman difabel, kami akui memang belum ada. Tetapi sebenarnya itu bisa dicari dari data Sidalih. Ya. Untuk data difabel kami ada, dan itu kan di data Sidalih itu ada umurnya, sehingga sebenarnya bisa di-track. Kami di kota Yogyakarta punya daftar pemilih dengan difabel, kami ada dengan tingkat umurnya juga ada. Terima kasih.
So if we can just ask, there's one more question here and one here. If we can ask both questions at the same time and then have the panelists address the questions. Right over here.
Assalamualaikum. Salam sejahtera, and very good afternoon to everyone. And thank you very much, Chairperson, for allowing me, giving me the chance to actually portray a question here. My name is Muhammad Sazalisha Ari from Malaysia. So I've been following the session ever since yesterday until today. I have the feeling that there is something which is amiss, because we're looking at the perspective, as a citizen of a country, we are eligible to vote. Okay, so the what we're saying here, the effort to make sure that election will be fully accessible for everyone, regardless whether you are able or disabled. And the question here is, can we turn the table around in the sense that we are going to be a voter? Are the candidates or the future politicians, whoever fighting or are actually waiting to have our vote, would they understand the aspect of what is actually needed for us being a disabled person? What do we need in our life? For example, here in Indonesia, there are approximately about millions, I'm not sure how many, 20 millions over of the people with disabilities here. Is the government actually taking good care of the needs of people with disabilities, or are we just making that election to be accessible in order for us to vote? But could there be a platform or a chance that this thing could be extended and say that in order to make it accessible, at the same time we wish the politicians or whoever are actually going to be the government or the leaders would be involved in such a session like this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we'll just turn to the other question real quickly and then let the panelists address both remarks.
Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya berada di sini mewakili dari Persatuan Penyandang Disabilitas Indonesia. Saya kebetulan relawan. Di Indonesia ada salah satu organisasi yang secara khusus menangani tentang kepemiluan bagi penyandang disabilitas, yaitu namanya PPUA Penca, Pusat Pemilihan Umum Akses Penyandang Cacat. PPUA ini berdiri pada tahun 2002, jadi sebelum adanya CRPD, PPUA Penca sudah bekerja untuk pemenuhan hak-hak bagi disabilitas. Tahun 2004, saat pemilu pertama, itu sudah mendorong beberapa calon legislatif yang masuk dalam pencalonan, yaitu ada Bu Aryani, salah seorang tunanetra, ada Bu Ani dari Kalimantan Timur, seorang pengguna kursi roda, ada di Sulawesi Barat, polio. Mereka sudah kita dorong masuk dalam pencalonan legislatif. Walaupun saat itu agak berat, karena masih mengacu pada Undang-Undang Sehat Jasmani dan Rohani, tapi kita menggunakan Undang-Undang Pemenuhan Hak Asasi Manusia. Akhirnya dia lolos. Dan dua kandidat calon masuk sebagai anggota legislatif, yaitu di Kalimantan Timur Bu Ani, di Sulawesi Barat yaitu Rahayu. Kemudian berikutnya, kalau kita melihat pemilu di Indonesia memang sangat kompleks. Yang pertama sistemnya, sudah diakui sistem paling rumit pemilu di dunia adalah Indonesia. Geografinya luas, penduduknya banyak, sistemnya paling rumit. Sehingga wajar kalau kemudian ada beberapa masalah terlebih kepada hak bagi penyandang disabilitas. Sehingga kita banyak mengadvokasi beberapa kegiatan, karena kita sadar betul, tadi Bu Rina sudah menyampaikan tentang akomodasi. Jadi bukan saja informasi, tapi tentu juga TPS-nya yang akses, penyampaian tentang tahapan-tahapan pemilu juga harus nyampe ke teman-teman. Jadi beberapa masalah memang itu kendala bagi pelaksanaan pemilu di Indonesia. Tapi tentunya kita yang pertama, mungkin kita sudah pernah bekerjasama dengan JPPR, dan PPUA juga sudah masuk dalam agenda pertama barangkali dalam mengadvokasi tentang kepemiluan hak-hak penyandang disabilitas. Kemudian sekarang fokus dalam nasionalnya. Jadi kami sadar, sekarang di Indonesia, mungkin Pak Irwanto nyuwun sewu Pak, karena beliau juga masuk salah satu pakar di kami. Jadi kita sadar betul, undang-undang kepemiluan ini sudah banyak mengakomodir tentang kepentingan bagi penyandang disabilitas. Undang-undangnya sedikit banyak ya, belum full, tapi sudah mengakomodir kepentingan dan keperluan bagi penyandang disabilitas. Tapi kendalanya adalah undang-undang ini terkadang tidak bisa nyampe pada implementasi di tingkat bawah. Sedangkan kita masih terfokus pada monitoring semua. Saya lihat banyak lembaga-lembaga memonitoring, tapi tidak bisa membantu bagaimana caranya sehingga tata cara undang-undang ini bisa nyampe ke petugas di lapangan. Kalau kita bahasa Indonesia katakan KPPS. Untuk itu kami fokus pada beberapa pelatihan kepada petugas KPPS. Karena itu untuk tombaknya dikatakan akses atau tidak. Karena undang-undangnya sebenarnya semenjak 2004 sudah ada tentang peraturan KPU tentang TPS harus akses. Tapi nyatanya karena petugas KPS nggak mengerti, sehingga kami mengambil sikap, mengambil bahwa ini penting untuk memberikan pelatihan, kemudian memberikan satu buku petunjuk kepada petugas KPPS. Jadi kami tidak terfokus pada pemantauan. Jadi barangkali kami di sini ingin menanyakan kepada teman-teman dari negara-negara lain, apakah ada di negara-negara Bapak Ibu sekalian lembaga atau organisasi yang secara khusus mengadvokasi bagi hak-hak politik bagi penyandang disabilitas. Apalagi sekarang sedang gaun dengan CRPD. Barangkali secara singkat itu aja. Mohon maaf Pak Irwanto. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. I think we're running low on time, so I'm just going to turn it over to each of our panelists to answer both of these two comments and questions, maybe 1 minute each down the line, starting with Professor Irwanto.
I think one lessons learned from our past election is that the role of cyber tech-based media and electronic media, and how they significantly influence how people or what people think about election. Unfortunately, these media are not yet well saturated with issues of disability. Yeah. A second lesson learned is for example, KPU, to have, I hope, a standard form of registration where disability is identified. And in time like this, I think I would encourage KPU to do a tracer study to look into participation of young people with disability, if it really matters, yeah? If you think that the participation of young people with disability really matters, then do a tracer study, because we don't know. Data is not available. And when we talked about voter education in school, I hope a special school or special education school are included in in that category. Therefore, it's also important not to teach just the children when we talked about school-based voter education, but to teach teacher. How teacher can bring ideas and philosophy and the importance of election to their students. I think that is key to then awareness among young people, and hopefully also participation in electoral process. Other things that I need to highlight is the role of DPO. I think DPO has very significant role, if not the most important role, in mobilizing young people with disability into the electoral process. Unfortunately, the organization has not been able to penetrate all districts and sub-districts. Most DPOs work in at the provincial level. So you need some type of a mechanism to actually reach our constituents in the rural areas and hard to reach places. One way to do it is through public television. But again, there's a lot of buts here, because public television in Indonesia is either half dead or nobody actually see public televisions anymore. Although public television has the most furthest, how do you call it, impacts into the all places nationwide, yeah. But our own public television, TVRI, I don't know how KPU utilize that, but that's also an important instrument to actually reach persons with disabilities in the provinces. And of course, then emerging cyber-based activists, disability activists that could also scale up their activities and also their training, so that more and more web-based information for persons with disabilities are available. I think those are my comments. Thank you.
I have a small example from India. There is a Rights of Persons with Disability bill which is to be passed, and there is a lot of connection between law and social media in terms of that particular bill. And I believe that if there is a detailed social media campaign and the laws that state at various levels of accessibility issues for persons with disabilities, that combined with youth and other disability rights groups, including the Election Commission of India and the Ministry of Social Justice. So together, when they all get together and we have a proper structure where the youth with disability will definitely take part in any decisions relating to the polling, relating to accessible voting, that can only ensure accessibility in a much clearer way, and highlighting those needs in the election manifestos. When the political parties make that aware that, this is the manifesto and these are the suggestions that these are the things that we are going to implement for the youth with disability, for everyone with disability for that matter. I think that will enable a very smooth functioning, and I think that's the way we can have both the law and social media have a connect between them, and definitely that should be a much more creative and much more progressive way where we can have more accessible elections in future.
კანონში ცვლილებების შესატანად და მათ აღსასრულებლად განსაკუთრებით დიდი როლი ენიჭება თვითონ კანონის მომხმარებლებს, ბენეფიციარებს.
The great role is being played in order to implement the laws and the changes that are made in the laws. Those who implement them play the huge role.
ანუ უშუალოდ ვისაც ეხება
in other words, those people who are actually are the concern in the law. For instance, our NGO, we appealed the court. And we had them cancel one of the law that actually gave the status of invalids, of the persons with disabilities were given the status of people who were incapable of doing anything. And people who had psychiatric problems were also, according to this law, given the same status. And we also made the government to establish the councils in accordance with the UN Convention. And also the organs that would provide the implementation and monitoring of the implementation process of the laws. And we were ourselves actively involved in the process because they themselves tried to avoid the process. So we were actually organizing the rallies and in a way putting a pressure on the government and the court to actually implement the changes and affect the people positively. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'd just like to give a big thank you to all of our panelists today. A round of applause. And hopefully we can continue these conversations in the hallway.
Can I have another round of applause to our speakers and moderators? And also thank you, Ms. Katya, for interpreting in front. And now we would like to present mementos to all of our speakers in front, and therefore we would like to invite Ms. Virginia Atkinson. To present our token of appreciation. The first goes to Mr. Ramini Macharashvili. The next one goes to Ms. Malvika Iyer. And our appreciation also goes to Mr. Irwanto. Thank you so much. And now we would like to conduct a group photo with all of the speakers with Ms. Virginia Atkinson. You are requested to smile. Thank you so much once again to all of our speakers and moderator. Please return to your seats. Very well. We will soon move on to our next plenary session.